Jessica's perfectly manicured hand squeezed my arm just a little too tight as she led me toward her boss at my son's wedding reception. "Mr. Thompson," she called out in that sugary voice she used when she wanted something. "I'd like you to meet my new mother-in-law. This is Dorothy. She's currently between jobs." The pause before between jobs hung in the air like smoke from a cheap cigar. But that wasn't the part that made my blood pressure spike. It was what came next, delivered with a smile that could have cut glass. "Actually, she's been unemployed for quite a while. Bit of a loser, really. If you're watching this, subscribe and let me know where you're watching from. Now, let me back up and explain how I ended up standing in a hotel ballroom wearing my best dress while my new daughter-in-law called me a loser to her boss. It all started 6 months earlier when Michael announced his engagement to Jessica Parker. I should have seen the red flags then, but love makes fools of us all, especially when it's love for our children. Michael had met Jessica at some fancy corporate event. She worked for Thompson & Associates, a mid-level marketing firm downtown. Real hotshot, according to her. Account manager with a corner office and everything. She made sure everyone knew about her success, especially during those awkward family dinners where she'd answer work calls right at the table. "Sorry," she'd say, not looking sorry at all. When you're climbing the corporate ladder, you can't afford to miss opportunities. The wedding planning was a nightmare from day one. Jessica had opinions about everything: the flowers, the music, the guest list, and especially my role in the ceremony. "I think it would be better if Dorothy kept a low profile," she told Michael, within earshot of me. "After all, she doesn't really understand professional networking." Professional networking. As if I hadn't spent 30 years building relationships in my own field. But I bit my tongue because Michael was happy. My boy, my only child, was glowing whenever he looked at her. And if Jessica made him happy, then I'd find a way to make peace with her attitude. What I didn't expect was for her to use our family's biggest gathering as an opportunity to publicly humiliate me. Standing there in that ballroom, watching her boss's face change as he processed her words, I realized something important. The game had just begun. Mr. Thompson's eyebrows shot up so fast they nearly disappeared into his receding hairline. He was a thin man in his 50s, the kind who probably counted calories and ran marathons on weekends. His handshake was firm but brief, like he was already calculating how quickly he could escape this conversation. "Unemployed," he repeated, glancing between Jessica and me. "I see." I could practically hear Jessica's internal victory lap. She'd successfully painted me as the family embarrassment in front of her boss. Probably thought it would make her look better by comparison. What she didn't know was that I'd been watching her performance all evening, cataloging every little power play, every subtle put-down. And what she definitely didn't know was who I really was. "Well," I said, offering my most grandmotherly smile, "I suppose that's one way to look at it." Jessica's grip on my arm tightened. She wanted me to fade into the background now that she'd made her point, but I wasn't quite ready to disappear. "Tell me, Mr. Thompson, how are you finding the challenges in your industry these days?" His face brightened slightly. "Oh, you know how it is. Competition's fierce. Everyone thinks they can do marketing now with social media and all that. We're constantly having to prove our value to clients. That must be especially difficult when you're dealing with larger competitors," I said thoughtfully. "Companies with more resources, better connections." Jessica's head whipped toward me, probably wondering how the unemployed loser knew anything about business competition. Mr. Thompson nodded enthusiastically. "Exactly. There's this one company, Walsh Enterprises. They've been eating everyone's lunch for years. Massive client base, incredible reputation. Their CEO is supposed to be some kind of genius, though nobody seems to know much about her personally. Very private person." The irony was so delicious I almost laughed out loud. Instead, I just smiled and said, "How fascinating." Jessica was looking between us with growing confusion, probably wondering how her loser mother-in-law was holding her own in a business conversation with her boss. The band struck up at last, and Michael swept Jessica onto the dance floor for their first dance as husband and wife. I watched from my table, nursing a glass of champagne that had gone flat 20 minutes ago. The happy couple looked perfect together. Him in his classic black tux, her in a dress that probably cost more than some people's cars. But perfection has a way of hiding cracks, and I was starting to see them everywhere. "She's lovely," said Mrs. Patterson, the elderly woman seated next to me. She'd been Jessica's kindergarten teacher, apparently, though Jessica had barely acknowledged her during the receiving line. Though I have to say, she's changed quite a bit since she was 5. People do grow up, I replied diplomatically, though I was thinking that some people grow up into exactly who they always were, just with better vocabulary. Of course, dear, it's just… Mrs. Patterson leaned closer, lowering her voice. She used to be such a sharing child, always making sure the other children had enough crayons, defending the shy ones from bullies. I wonder sometimes what happens to that kindness as we get older. I glanced at Jessica, who was laughing at something Michael had whispered in her ear. For a moment she looked genuinely happy, and I could almost see the 5-year-old who'd shared her crayons. Then the song ended, and she immediately started scanning the room, probably looking for more important people to network with at her own wedding reception. That's when I noticed her heading straight for the Hendersons' table. Robert Henderson owned the biggest construction company in the state, and his wife Margaret sat on half the charity boards in town. Jessica had done her homework. She knew exactly who mattered in this room, and she was working it like a professional conference. I excused myself from Mrs. Patterson and decided to powder my nose. But instead of heading to the restroom, I slipped out onto the hotel's outdoor terrace. The September evening was perfect. Cool enough for my shawl, but warm enough to be comfortable. I needed a moment to think, to process what had just happened, and decide how to handle it. That's when I heard voices from around the corner. Jessica's voice, specifically, talking to someone on her phone. No, Mom, it went perfectly. I made sure Thompson knows I'm not like these small-town people, especially the mother-in-law. You should have seen his face when I told him about her. A pause. Then laughter. Trust me, after tonight, he'll see me as the professional one in this family. I stayed on that terrace for another 10 minutes, listening to Jessica make 2 more calls. One to someone she called Babe, which was interesting since she'd just married my son, and another to her sister, rehashing the same story about how she'd successfully diminished me in front of her boss. Each retelling got more elaborate, turning me from unemployed to basically unemployable to kind of pathetic, really. The thing about eavesdropping is that it changes you, not because of what you learn about other people, but because of what you learn about yourself. Standing there in the shadows, listening to my son's new wife tear me apart for sport, I realized I'd been playing a role for months. The accommodating mother-in-law, the woman who didn't want to cause trouble, the gracious loser who'd step aside for the younger generation. But that woman was a fiction. And fiction, as any good storyteller knows, only works if everyone agrees to believe it. When I finally returned to the reception, the cake had been cut and the crowd was starting to thin out. The older relatives were making their excuses, pleading early bedtimes and long drives home. I found Michael at the bar, loosening his tie and looking pleasantly exhausted. Mom, there you are. I was looking for you. Jessica wanted to introduce you to some more of her work friends. How thoughtful of her, I said, accepting the glass of wine he handed me. Though I think I've met enough of her colleagues for one evening. Michael frowned slightly. Is everything okay? You seem different. Smart boy. He'd always been able to read my moods, even as a child. Just tired, sweetheart. It's been a big day. I patted his cheek, marveling at how much he looked like his father at that age. Your wedding was beautiful. Jessica looked stunning. She did. Didn't she? His face lit up the way it always did when he talked about her. I'm really glad you two are getting along so well. It means everything to me. Getting along. If only he knew what his blushing bride had said about me just an hour ago. But this wasn't the time or place for that conversation. This was his wedding day, and I wouldn't be the one to spoil it for him. Of course we are, I lied smoothly. She's part of the family now. And that's when it hit me. The perfect, elegant solution to my Jessica problem. She was part of the family now, which meant she was my responsibility, and I took my responsibilities very seriously. The Monday morning after the wedding, I sat in my home office with my first cup of coffee and a legal pad full of notes. Jessica had made one critical error in her little performance at the reception. She'd assumed I was exactly what I appeared to be, a retired woman of a certain age with no current professional connections. But assumptions, as I'd learned over 30 years in business, are dangerous things. I picked up my phone and dialed a familiar number. Patricia, It's Dorothy Walsh. I hope you enjoyed your weekend off. Yes, the wedding was lovely. Thank you for asking. Listen, I need you to set up a meeting with the Thompson account team for this afternoon. And Patricia, make sure everyone understands this is confidential until I decide how to proceed. Patricia Martinez had been my executive assistant for 12 years. She knew exactly what that tone in my voice meant. Someone was about to have a very bad day, and I was going to enjoy every minute of it. By Tuesday, I had a complete file on Jessica Parker Walsh, her employment history, her college transcripts, her credit report, even her social media posts going back 5 years. Information is power, and I'd always believed in being thoroughly prepared before making any important decisions. What I found was fascinating. Jessica had been with Thompson & Associates for 3 years, starting as a junior account coordinator and working her way up to account manager. Her performance reviews were solid, but not spectacular. She was competent, reliable, and ambitious. Exactly the kind of employee who did good work but would never set the world on fire. More interesting were her social media posts. Instagram photos from expensive restaurants with captions about client dinners that happened on weekends, Facebook check-ins at luxury hotels during what should have been business trips, and LinkedIn posts about networking events that looked suspiciously like vacation photos. But the real goldmine was her expense reports. Patricia's team had been very thorough. 3 years of questionable charges, creative interpretations of business expenses, and receipts that didn't quite add up. Nothing criminal exactly, but definitely not the kind of financial judgment you'd expect from someone in her position. I leaned back in my chair and smiled. Jessica had made the classic mistake of underestimating her opponent. She'd seen a gray-haired woman in a conservative dress and assumed she was dealing with someone's grandmother. Well, she was dealing with someone's grandmother. She just hadn't bothered to find out whose grandmother I was. By Wednesday, I'd made my decision. I called Patricia and asked her to schedule a meeting with Mr. Thompson for Thursday afternoon. Tell him it's regarding the future of his company's relationship with Walsh Enterprises. And Patricia? Make sure Jessica Walsh now, is included in the meeting. Thursday arrived gray and drizzly, the kind of weather that makes everyone want to crawl back into bed. But I was up before dawn, selecting my outfit with the same care a general might choose weapons for battle. I settled on my navy blue power suit, the one I'd worn to my first board meeting 25 years ago, paired with the pearl necklace Michael's father had given me for our 10th anniversary. Professional, authoritative, unmistakably in charge. The Thompson & Associates office was exactly what I'd expected. All glass and chrome with motivational posters about synergy and thinking outside the box. The receptionist, a young man with perfectly styled hair and a nervous smile, announced my arrival with the kind of reverence usually reserved for visiting dignitaries. "Ms. Walsh is here for her appointment with Mr. Thompson," he said into his headset, then turned to me with a bright smile. "He'll be right with you. Can I get you anything? Coffee? Water?" "Just coffee, Black," I said, settling into one of their uncomfortable modern chairs. The waiting area gave me a perfect view of the office bullpen, where I could see Jessica at her desk, typing furiously at her computer. She was wearing a sharp red blazer and had her hair pulled back in a style that probably took an hour to perfect. Professional Jessica, ready to impress. She hadn't noticed me yet, which was perfect. I wanted the element of surprise. Mr. Thompson appeared exactly at 2 o'clock, flanked by 2 other executives I didn't recognize, and, bringing up the rear, Jessica. She stopped dead when she saw me, her face cycling through confusion, recognition, and something that might have been panic. "Mrs. Walsh," Mr. Thompson said, extending his hand with a warm smile. "Thank you so much for coming in. I have to say, when your assistant called, we were all very excited about the possibility of working with Walsh Enterprises." Jessica's face had gone pale. She was staring at me like I'd just walked through a wall. "The pleasure is mine," I said graciously, shaking his hand. "Though I should mention, it's Ms. Walsh. And before we begin, I believe there's something we need to discuss about one of your employees." The conference room fell so quiet you could have heard a pin drop on the polished mahogany table. Jessica had gone from pale to green, and I was starting to worry she might actually faint. Mr. Thompson, meanwhile, was looking between us with the expression of a man who just realized he'd walked into a minefield. "I'm sorry," he said slowly, "but I think there might be some confusion. This is Jessica Walsh, one of our account managers. She just got married this past weekend. And you're Dorothy Walsh, I said pleasantly. Jessica's new mother-in-law, and the CEO of Walsh Enterprises. I let that sink in for exactly 3 seconds before continuing. The same Walsh Enterprises that your company has been trying to land as a client for the past 18 months. Jessica made a sound that was somewhere between a gasp and a whimper. The 2 other executives, who I now realized were probably brought in to help pitch to Walsh Enterprises, were staring at me like I'd just announced I was from Mars. But at the wedding, Mr. Thompson stammered, Jessica said you were unemployed. She called you? He trailed off, apparently realizing that repeating his employee's exact words might not be the wisest career move. A loser, I finished helpfully. Yes, I remember, along with several other colorful descriptions, all delivered with such enthusiasm in front of your colleagues and my family. I opened my briefcase and pulled out a manila folder. Which brings us to why I'm really here today. Jessica finally found her voice. Dorothy, I can explain. It was wedding nerves, you know? I didn't mean, oh, but you did mean it, I said gently. In fact, you meant it so much that you called your mother immediately afterward to brag about how you'd put me in my place. Then your sister. Then someone you called Babe, which was particularly interesting since you'd just married my son. The color drained from Mr. Thompson's face. He was starting to understand that this wasn't just about hurt feelings. This was about his company's relationship with their most important potential client. Perhaps, I continued, opening the folder and spreading its contents across the conference table, we should discuss Jessica's performance as an employee before we talk about Walsh Enterprises' business needs. The documents made a satisfying rustling sound as I arranged them. Expense reports, receipts, performance reviews, social media screenshots, 3 years of Jessica's professional life laid bare. Mr. Thompson's eyes widened as he scanned the papers. These are internal company documents. How did you— Due diligence, I said simply. When someone publicly humiliates me, I like to understand who I'm dealing with, and what I found was quite enlightening. I pointed to a particular expense report. This restaurant receipt from last March, for instance. Jessica claimed it was a client dinner, but according to the reservation records, it was actually her birthday party with 8 of her college friends. Jessica's hands were shaking now. There must be some mistake. Or this hotel stay in Miami last June, I continued, ignoring her protests. Billed as a business conference, but remarkably similar to the vacation photos she posted on Instagram the same weekend. The ones where she's wearing a bikini by the pool, not attending seminars. One of the other executives, a woman in her 40s with sharp eyes, leaned forward. Are you suggesting that Jessica has been falsifying expense reports? I'm not suggesting anything, I replied. I'm simply presenting facts and allowing you to draw your own conclusions. I pulled out another document. This is Jessica's LinkedIn profile from last week. Notice how she describes herself as senior management and key decision maker at Thompson & Associates. Interesting title inflation for an account manager, don't you think? Mr. Thompson was practically sweating now. He'd obviously never looked closely at Jessica's social media presence, and what he was seeing wasn't painting a flattering picture of either her judgment or her honesty. Now, I said, closing the folder with a snap, let's talk about Walsh Enterprises' business needs. We're looking for a marketing partner for our expansion into the southeastern markets. The contract would be worth approximately $12 million over 3 years. The room went dead silent. $12 million was probably more than Thompson & Associates made in total annual revenue. $12 million, Mr. Thompson repeated faintly. He looked like a man who'd just been offered a lifeline and a noose at the same time. The business opportunity was enormous, but Jessica's presence in the room was making it impossible for him to think clearly. Of course, I continued conversationally, Walsh Enterprises has very strict standards when it comes to business ethics. We've found that companies with questionable internal practices tend to bring those same attitudes to their client relationships. I gestured to the documents still spread across the table. We simply can't afford to work with organizations that don't share our values. Jessica suddenly stood up, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. This is ridiculous. You can't do this to me because of some silly misunderstanding at a wedding. I looked at her with the same expression I might use to examine something unpleasant on the bottom of my shoe. Some silly misunderstanding? Jessica, you publicly humiliated me at my son's wedding, then bragged about it to multiple people. You've been inflating your job title, padding your expense reports, and apparently maintaining relationships that your new husband might find concerning. What relationships? She snapped, then immediately looked like she wished she could take the words back. The babe you called after the wedding, I said mildly. The one you told about how you'd handled your new mother-in-law. I'm sure Michael would be fascinated to learn about that conversation. Mr. Thompson cleared his throat. Perhaps we should take a short recess. Give everyone a chance to process this information. Actually, I said, standing up and gathering my documents, I think we're done here. Mr. Thompson, you have some decisions to make about your employee and your company's future. I'll be in touch next week to discuss whether Walsh Enterprises will be moving forward with this partnership. I walked to the door, then turned back. Oh, and Jessica, you might want to update your LinkedIn profile. I have a feeling your job description is about to become much more accurate. The call came at 7:30 that evening while I was enjoying a glass of wine on my back patio. Michael's name appeared on my phone screen, and I could practically feel the panic radiating through the device before I even answered. Mom, what the hell did you do? I took a sip of wine and watched a cardinal land on my bird feeder. Hello, darling. How was your first day back from the honeymoon? Don't hello, darling me. Jessica came home in tears. She says you got her fired. I didn't get anyone fired, I said truthfully. I simply had a business meeting with her employer. A business meeting where you showed up as the CEO of some company and ambushed her. Walsh Enterprises isn't some company, Michael. It's the company I've been running for the past 15 years. The company that put you through college and law school. The company that bought your first house and your first car. I kept my voice level, though I could feel anger building in my chest. The company your wife never bothered to ask about. There was silence on the other end of the line. Then, quietly, you're the CEO of Walsh Enterprises? I have been since your father died. I kept our last name on the door because it was his dream too, but yes, I've been running it all this time. But you never you never talked about work, because you never asked, I said gently. And because I wanted you to succeed on your own merit, not because people knew you were my son. I paused, something your wife might have benefited from understanding before she decided to publicly call me a loser. Another long silence. Then, she told me what she said at the wedding. She feels terrible about it. I'm sure she does. Especially now that she knows who I am. Mom, please, she made a mistake, but she's my wife. Can't we find some way to work this out? That was the question I'd been dreading. Because the truth was, I could fix this with a phone call. I could make Thompson and Associates ignore Jessica's questionable expenses and inflated LinkedIn profile. I could hand them the $12 million contract and pretend none of this had happened. But that wouldn't teach Jessica anything. And more importantly, it wouldn't protect my son from the woman he'd married. Michael, I said carefully, what exactly did Jessica tell you about why she lost her job? The silence stretched long enough that I began to wonder if the call had dropped. Then Michael's voice came back, smaller than before. She said you were vindictive, that you couldn't handle a little joke at the wedding, so you used your business connections to destroy her career. I closed my eyes and counted to 10. Jessica had learned nothing from our encounter. Even faced with the consequences of her actions, she was still playing the victim. And what do you think about that explanation? I think, he paused, and I could practically hear him choosing his words carefully. I think there's probably more to the story. There is. Your wife has been falsifying expense reports for 3 years. She's been inflating her job title on professional networks. And she's been maintaining what appears to be a romantic relationship with someone she calls Babe, someone she called immediately after our wedding to discuss how she'd handled me. The sound Michael made was somewhere between a gasp and a groan. That can't be true. I have documentation, sweetheart. Phone records, social media posts, expense reports. I didn't manufacture evidence. I simply compiled what was already there. Why didn't you tell me this before the meeting with her boss? That was the question I'd been hoping he wouldn't ask. Because the answer revealed something about me that I wasn't particularly proud of. because I wanted her to have the chance to come clean on her own. I wanted to see if she would take responsibility for her actions or if she would continue to lie and manipulate. And she chose to lie. She did. Even when confronted with evidence, she blamed everyone except herself. I heard Jessica's voice in the background, shrill and demanding. Michael's voice became muffled as he covered the phone, but I could still make out pieces of their argument. Her insisting that I was vindictive and cruel. Him asking about the expense reports and the phone calls. Her claiming everything was taken out of context. When Michael came back on the line, his voice was different, tired, older. "Mom, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. Always. Did you plan this? The whole thing? Letting her embarrass herself at the wedding, investigating her background, setting up that meeting? Did you orchestrate all of this?" I looked out at my garden, where the evening light was turning everything golden. 30 years of building a business had taught me that sometimes the most important battles are won not through direct confrontation, but through patience and preparation. "I didn't plan for your wife to call me a loser at your wedding, Michael. But once she did, yes, I planned my response very carefully. And now she's lost her job, and Thompson and Associates probably won't get your contract." "Actually," I said, allowing myself a small smile, "I called Mr. Thompson this afternoon. Walsh Enterprises will be moving forward with the partnership. Their company will get the contract, and they'll use the revenue to hire better employees with stronger ethical standards. And Jessica? That's between her and her former employer, though I understand she'll be receiving an excellent reference letter that accurately reflects her 3 years of service." Michael was quiet for so long that I began to worry about him. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "I married someone I don't really know, didn't I?" My heart broke a little for him. "You married someone you thought you knew. Sometimes that's the same thing, and sometimes it isn't. The question now is what you're going to do with what you've learned." After we hung up, I sat on my patio until the stars came out. Jessica would land on her feet. People like her always did. She'd find another job, probably at a company that didn't do background checks quite as thoroughly. She might even learn something from this experience, though I doubted it. But Michael would be okay. He was stronger than he knew, and smarter than Jessica had given him credit for. And now he had all the information he needed to make his own decisions about his marriage and his future. As for me, well, I'd learned something too. I'd learned that after 30 years of being diplomatic and accommodating, sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to be anyone's doormat, even if it means your son has to face some hard truths about the woman he married, especially then. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe and feel free to share your story in the comments. Your voice matters. After my son's fraud destroyed my company and reputation, I ended up waitressing. One day, a wealthy businessman joked, "Financial advice, waitress." He didn't know who I used to be. I looked at his papers. "You'll be bankrupt in 6 months." He laughed it off. Next day, 6 a.m. sharp, he was at my door. If you're watching this, subscribe and let me know where you're watching from. Let me take you back to how this all started. 2 years ago, I was Catherine Wells, senior partner at Wells & Associates Financial Consulting. I had corner offices in downtown Chicago, managed portfolios worth over $50 million, and drove a BMW that cost more than most people's annual salary. My clients included tech entrepreneurs, real estate moguls, and old money families who trusted me with their generational wealth. Then my son Michael decided to play Gordon Gekko with client funds. The FBI raid happened on a Tuesday morning in October. I was reviewing quarterly reports when agents in navy jackets stormed through our mahogany doors like they owned the place, which, legally speaking, they did once they slapped those seizure notices on everything from my coffee mug to my diplomas. Michael had been forging my signature for 8 months, moving money between accounts like he was playing 3-card Monte with people's retirement funds. $2.7 million gone, along with my reputation, my license, and my sanity. The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd spent 30 years teaching people how to spot financial red flags, and my own son had been waving them right under my nose. The media had a field day. Financial advisor's son bilks clients in Ponzi scheme. My name was attached to every headline. even though I was victim number one. The lawsuits came next. Civil suits from clients who lost their savings, criminal proceedings that cleared me legally but destroyed me professionally. Even vindicated, nobody wanted financial advice from the woman whose own family had robbed them blind. By Christmas, I was 68 years old with $47 in my checking account and a studio apartment in a neighborhood where sirens were the dominant musical genre. That's when I saw the help wanted sign at Murphy's Diner. Murphy's Diner wasn't exactly what you'd call fine dining. The coffee tasted like it had been filtered through old gym socks. The vinyl booths had more cracks than a Chicago sidewalk in February, and the fluorescent lights made everyone look like they were suffering from some exotic disease. But it paid cash daily, didn't require references, and the owner, Tommy Murphy, didn't care that I'd been plastered across the financial pages for all the wrong reasons. "You ever waitress before?" Tommy asked during my interview, which consisted of him looking me up and down while wiping his hands on a stained apron. "I've been serving people for 30 years, I said. It wasn't technically a lie. The job was harder than managing million-dollar portfolios, if you can believe that. At least hedge fund managers said please when they were being condescending. The breakfast crowd at Murphy's treated waitresses like walking coffee dispensers with the unfortunate side effect of having opinions. But I adapted. I had to. The tips paid for my insulin, the shifts kept me busy enough to avoid thinking about how spectacularly my life had imploded, and the work was honest in a way that made me feel clean again. 3 months in, I'd developed what Tommy generously called interpersonal skills and what I called the ability to smile while fantasizing about poisoning someone's coffee. That's when Harrison Blackwell walked into my life. It was a Thursday morning in March, the kind of day when Chicago couldn't decide if it wanted to be winter or spring, so it chose to be miserable instead. The breakfast rush was winding down when he strolled through the door like he owned not just the diner, but the entire city block. Designer suit, Italian leather shoes, and the kind of watch that cost more than I'd made in the past 6 months. He was probably in his mid-50s, with silver gray hair and the confident bearing of a man who'd never heard the word no applied to anything he wanted. He settled into booth 7, pulled out his phone, and immediately began conducting what sounded like a hostile takeover via speakerphone, because apparently common courtesy was for people who couldn't afford $1,000 suits. "Excuse me," I said, approaching his table with my best customer service smile. "I'm going to need you to lower your voice or take that call outside. Other customers are trying to enjoy their breakfast." Harrison Blackwell looked up at me like I'd suggested he donate a kidney to charity. His pale blue eyes did a quick assessment, categorizing me somewhere between furniture and minor inconvenience. "I'll have coffee, black, and whatever passes for Eggs Benedict in this establishment," he said, never actually pausing his phone conversation about crushing some competitor's quarterly projections. I poured his coffee, noting that his papers were spread across the table like he was conducting board meetings at the United Nations. Financial statements, merger documents, acquisition proposals. My trained eye couldn't help but spot familiar warning signs in the scattered documents, old habits dying hard as concrete. 20 minutes later, he was still talking, now discussing some real estate deal in Miami with enough volume to wake the dead. The other customers were shooting dirty looks, and Tommy was giving me the "handle this or you're fired" stare from behind the counter. "Sir," I tried again, "I really need you to—" "Hold on," he said into the phone, then looked at me with the expression of a man addressing a particularly slow child. "Do you understand that this call is worth more than you'll make in your entire lifetime?" The diner went quiet. Even the coffee pot stopped percolating, like it was holding its breath waiting for what came next. I looked down at the papers scattered across his table. Blackwell Enterprises, real estate acquisitions, tech startup investments. And right there, visible in the scattered documents, the kind of leverage patterns and cash flow indicators that had kept me awake at night when I saw them in other portfolios. "Actually," I said, my voice carrying just loud enough for the whole diner to hear, "I understand that you're about to lose everything you think you own." He blinked, clearly not expecting his waitress to have opinions about his business empire. "I beg your pardon? Those leverage ratios look dangerous. Your cash flow structure appears unstable, and from what I can see, you're carrying more debt than your asset base can reasonably support." The The silence in the diner was now complete. Harrison Blackwell stared at me like I'd started speaking ancient Greek. "I'm sorry," Harrison said, his voice dripping with condescension, "but I don't recall asking for financial advice from the waitress." The words hit the diner like a slap. A few customers chuckled, the uncomfortable kind of laughter that happens when someone with power humiliates someone without it. Tommy's face went red, but he didn't intervene. Not for a waitress challenging a customer who probably spent more on lunch than Murphy's made in a week. I felt the familiar burn of shame creeping up my neck, the same feeling I'd had during every news interview, every courtroom appearance, every moment when people looked at me like I was some kind of con artist instead of the victim of one. But then I looked down at those papers again, at the patterns that didn't lie, even when everything else did. "You're right," I said, my voice steady as winter. "You didn't ask, but if you had, I'd tell you to get a full audit of your financial structure before it's too late. What I can see from here suggests you're heading for serious trouble." Harrison's laugh was sharp and mirthless. "Is that so? And what exactly qualifies you to make such bold predictions about my business?" "Experience," I said simply. "I've seen enough balance sheets to recognize the warning signs, even from scattered documents on a diner table." The color started to drain from his face. "That's quite enough," he said, standing abruptly and gathering his papers. "I don't know where you think you learned to read financial statements, but—" "Catherine Wells," I said, quietly. He froze. "Wells and Associates Financial Consulting. I managed portfolios for 30 years before my son destroyed my company. I've seen more financial disasters than you've had board meetings, and yours has all the classic warning signs." Harrison stared at me for a long moment, his expression cycling through disbelief, anger, and something that might have been fear. "Impossible," he muttered, but his voice lacked conviction. "I'd need to see your full financials to be certain," I said, pouring myself a cup of coffee with hands that weren't shaking anymore. "But if you want a professional opinion, I'll be here tomorrow." He left without paying for his eggs Benedict. The next morning came gray and drizzling. Typical Chicago spring weather that couldn't decide if it wanted to be depressing or just consistently annoying. I was opening Murphy's at 6 a.m., same as every Thursday, when I heard the knock on the glass door. Harrison Blackwell stood outside in the rain, looking like he hadn't slept in a week. His designer suit was wrinkled, his usually perfect hair disheveled, and he was clutching a manila folder against his chest like it contained the secrets of the universe. I unlocked the door, noting that his Italian leather shoes were soaked through. "We're not open for another hour," I said. "I need to talk to you," he said, his voice hoarse, "about what you said yesterday." I stepped aside to let him in, flipping on the lights and starting the coffee machine out of habit. The diner felt different at this hour, quieter, more honest somehow, like secrets were easier to tell before the rest of the world woke up. "Coffee?" I asked. He nodded, sliding into the same booth he'd occupied yesterday. His hands were shaking slightly as he opened the folder and spread papers across the table. "I spent all night going through my books," he said. "Had my accountant prepare summary reports, pulled records going back 2 years. I poured his coffee, noting the dark circles under his eyes. "And? You were right." The words came out like he was confessing to murder. "About the warning signs, the leverage problems, all of it. My accountant says we have maybe 4 months before the creditors start circling." I sat down across from him, curious despite myself. In my old life, clients came to me before they reached the cliff edge, not after they'd already started falling. "How did you see it so quickly?" he asked. "My own financial team didn't catch what you spotted in 20 minutes. Your financial team gets paid to tell you what you want to hear," I said, sipping my coffee. "I don't." Harrison laughed, but there was no humor in it. Brutal honesty from the woman I insulted in front of a room full of strangers. "There's some irony for you." "There usually is." He leaned forward, his pale blue eyes intense. "I need your help, Catherine. I don't know what that looks like or what it costs, but I need someone who can see through the bullshit and tell me if there's a way out of this mess." "I'm a waitress," I reminded him. "You're Catherine Wells," he said, "and despite everything that happened, you were one of the best financial minds in Chicago before your son destroyed your company." I felt something stir in my chest, a feeling I hadn't experienced in 2 years. Professional pride, maybe? Or just the simple pleasure of being recognized for something other than my son's crimes. What exactly are you asking me? I'm asking you to save my company. Save your company? I repeated, making sure I'd heard him correctly. Mr. Blackwell, I serve coffee and take orders for eggs. I haven't touched a financial consulting project in 2 years, and when I did, it ended with FBI raids and criminal investigations. Because your son was a thief, Harrison said bluntly. Not because you were incompetent. The words hung in the air between us. It was the first time in 2 years that anyone had made that distinction without being paid to represent me legally. Besides, he continued, what do you have to lose? You're working at a diner in a neighborhood where the sirens play lullabies. I'm offering you a chance to do what you were born to do. And if I can't fix it? If your company collapses anyway? Harrison shrugged. Then at least I'll go down knowing I tried everything, including swallowing my pride and asking a waitress for help. I studied his face, looking for signs of deception or desperation. Both were there, but underneath was something else. Respect, maybe. Or just the recognition that pride was a luxury he could no longer afford. I'd need to do this legally, I said slowly. I maintained my Series 66 license and kept my LLC active. Old habits. Never thought I'd need them again. You still have your credentials? Financial advising was my life for 30 years. Even after everything collapsed, I couldn't quite let go completely. Harrison's expression shifted to something approaching relief. Then we can do this properly. I'd need complete access, I continued. Every bank statement, every loan document, every contract and agreement. No secrets, no off-limits files. Done. I'd need authority to make recommendations. If I say restructure something, you consider it seriously. If I say liquidate an asset, you evaluate it. Understood. And I'd need my old consulting rate, I said, naming a figure that made his eyebrows rise. Plus equity if we turn this around. If I save your company, I own part of it. Harrison was quiet for a long moment, calculating risks and rewards with the desperation of a drowning man being offered a life preserver that might be made of concrete. Agreed, he said finally. But I have one condition, which is, we position this as bringing in independent strategic consulting, professional turnaround expertise. My board doesn't need to know you've been working at Murphy's. I almost laughed. From senior partner to waitress to independent consultant. At least this trajectory was pointing upward again. Ashamed to admit you found your consultant in a diner. Ashamed to admit I need outside help at all, he corrected. My business reputation is hanging by a thread. Fair enough. In the corporate world, admitting weakness was like chumming shark-infested waters. When do we start? I asked. How about now? Harrison pulled out his phone and dialed. James? It's Harrison. I need you to prepare a complete financial package for Wells Strategic Consulting. Everything. Yes, everything. Have it ready by noon. He hung up and looked at me with something approaching hope. Welcome back to the game, Catherine Wells. I refilled his coffee cup, my hands steady for the first time in months. Let's see if I remember how to play. Harrison's office occupied the entire 42nd floor of the Blackwell Tower, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a view of Lake Michigan that probably cost more per square foot than most people's houses. When his assistant, James, handed me the comprehensive financial files, I felt like an archaeologist discovering a lost civilization. Mr. Blackwell is in meetings until 3, James said, his tone suggesting that independent consultants who used to be waitresses ranked somewhere below office furniture in his hierarchy of respect. Perfect, I said, settling into the conference room with my coffee. I work better without an audience. 3 hours later, I understood why Harrison looked like a man facing his own execution. Blackwell Enterprises wasn't just bleeding money. It was hemorrhaging like a trauma patient in an emergency room. The Miami real estate project alone was a financial catastrophe that made the Titanic look like a minor navigation error. But buried in the chaos, I found something interesting. A pattern of investments that didn't quite fit the rest of Harrison's portfolio. Tech startups, biomedical research, clean energy projects, all showing modest but steady returns while his flashier ventures crumbled. When Harrison returned from his meetings, he found me reorganizing his entire financial structure on the whiteboard like I was planning a military campaign. How bad is it? He asked, loosening his tie. Worse than you thought, I said, capping my marker. But not as hopeless as it looks. I walked him through the analysis, explaining how his ego had led him to chase high-profile deals while ignoring the solid, unsexy investments that were actually making money. His face grew paler with each revelation. "So what you're telling me," he said slowly, "is that I'm an idiot. I'm telling you that you're a successful businessman who started believing his own press releases," I corrected. "There's a difference, though the end result is remarkably similar." Harrison laughed despite himself. "Brutal honesty strikes again. You wanted someone who wouldn't blow sunshine up your assets," I reminded him. "I'm delivering as advertised." Over the next week, I developed a rescue plan that was surgical in its precision. Sell the Miami disaster to cut losses, liquidate 3 underperforming subsidiaries, and double down on the quiet winners that nobody was paying attention to. It would mean swallowing Harrison's pride and admitting failure publicly, but it would save the company. "The board will want detailed justification," Harrison said when I presented the proposal. "These are projects I've been promoting for 2 years. Then we'll give them detailed justification," I said. "Professional analysis, market data, the works. This isn't about pride anymore. Harrison, it's about survival." The first test came during a board meeting on a rainy Thursday. I sat at the conference table as Wells Strategic Consulting, officially presenting the turnaround strategy to 11 skeptical faces. "This is madness," declared Marcus Webb, the board chairman who'd been questioning Harrison's leadership for months. "You're proposing we abandon our most high-profile investments." "I'm proposing we abandon our most expensive mistakes," I replied, my voice steady and professional. "The data supports strategic divestiture of underperforming assets and reallocation to profitable sectors." I walked them through the numbers, showing how the Miami project was hemorrhaging cash with no realistic path to profitability, while the overlooked tech investments were generating consistent returns. The vote was close, 5 in favor, 4 against, with 2 abstentions. But it passed. As the board members filed out, Webb approached Harrison with the expression of a man who smelled blood in the water. "Bringing in outside consultants reeks of desperation, Harrison," he said quietly. "The investors are asking questions. How long before they lose confidence entirely?" "As long as it takes to turn this company around," Harrison replied. After Webb left, Harrison slumped in his chair like a deflated balloon. "He's planning something," I observed. "I know," Harrison said. "The question is whether we can save the company before he makes his move." "We will," I said, surprised by my own conviction. "But we need to move fast." Over the next 2 weeks, I implemented the restructuring plan with the precision of a surgeon. The Miami property sold to a developer who specialized in distressed assets. The 3 underperforming subsidiaries were liquidated, with proceeds redirected to debt reduction. The profitable tech investments received additional funding. Harrison's company began showing signs of recovery, but Webb's opposition grew more vocal. He questioned every decision, demanded additional board meetings, and made it clear he was building a case for Harrison's removal. "He's not just trying to remove you," I told Harrison one evening as we reviewed quarterly projections. "He's positioning himself for a takeover." "Based on what?" "Pattern recognition. I've seen it before. Board chairman undermines CEO, creates crisis of confidence, then swoops in to save the company. Usually involves acquiring additional shares at discount prices during the chaos." Harrison stared at the financial reports spread across his desk. "So what do? We do what we've been doing. Save the company despite his interference. Make our success so obvious that the board has no choice but to support you." But I had a feeling Webb wasn't going to make it that easy. 3 weeks into our partnership, I was working late in Harrison's office when I found the photograph tucked inside a loan agreement from 1987. It was a family photo. Harrison, maybe 20 years younger, with his arm around a woman with dark hair and warm eyes. 2 small children sat at their feet, a boy and a girl who couldn't have been more than 5 and 7. "My family," Harrison said from the doorway, startling me. "Former family, I should say." I held up the photograph. "Divorce? Death," he said quietly, settling into the chair across from me. "Car accident. Drunk driver ran a red light when the kids were 8 and 10. The words hit me like a physical blow. "Harrison, I'm so sorry. It was 15 years ago," he said, but his voice carried the weight of someone who'd never quite recovered. "Sarah always said I worked too much, that I was building an empire for a family that never got to see me. After they died, Work was all I had left. Suddenly, his desperate need to save the company made perfect sense. It wasn't about money or ego. It was about preserving the only thing that gave his life meaning. "Is that why you've been making increasingly risky investments?" I asked gently. "Because the safe choices remind you of what you lost?" Harrison was quiet for a long moment. "You're quite the psychologist, along with being a financial wizard." "I'm a mother," I said. "I understand loving someone so much that losing them breaks something inside you." "Your son." "My son broke something different," I said. "Trust mostly, but love? That's harder to kill." We worked in comfortable silence after that. Both of us focused on numbers that represented more than profit and loss. They represented hope, redemption, and the possibility that broken things could be repaired. The company's recovery was becoming undeniable. Revenue was stabilizing, debt payments were on schedule, and the profitable investments were exceeding projections. But Webb's campaign against Harrison intensified. "He's calling for another board meeting," Harrison said, reading an email. "Emergency session to discuss ongoing concerns about leadership decisions." "Let him," I said. "We have the numbers on our side now." At midnight, Harrison called for a car to take me home. As I gathered my papers, he touched my arm gently. "Catherine," he said, "thank you. Not just for the financial advice, for understanding." "Don't thank me yet," I said. "We still have a company to save. And something tells me Webb's not finished with us." The moment I'd been dreading arrived on a Tuesday morning in April. I was reviewing quarterly projections when James burst into the conference room with panic in his eyes. "Ms. Wells," he said, "there are FBI agents in the lobby asking for you." My blood turned to ice water. After 2 years, I'd thought the investigations were finally over. But apparently, someone had connected Catherine Wells, the consultant, to Catherine Wells from the financial scandal. "Do they have a warrant?" I asked, my voice calmer than I felt. "I don't know. Mr. Blackwell is handling it, but they're insisting on speaking with you." I walked to Harrison's office with the resignation of someone approaching the gallows. Through the glass walls, I could see 2 agents in dark suits, their faces professionally neutral. "Ms. Wells," the older agent said when I entered. "I'm Agent Martinez. This is Agent Foster. We need to discuss your involvement in an ongoing investigation." "What investigation?" I asked. "Corporate espionage and financial fraud. We believe you may have information relevant to our case." Relief flooded through me. They wanted information, not to arrest me. "Your son Michael has been cooperating with our investigation," Agent Foster continued. "He's provided information about a conspiracy involving multiple financial firms, including your former company." "A conspiracy?" "According to Michael's statement, someone approached him 3 years ago with a proposal to destabilize certain financial consulting firms. The goal was to acquire their client lists and assets at discount prices." The room spun slightly. Someone approached Michael before the fraud began. A board member of a major corporation who specializes in acquiring distressed companies. Michael claims this person provided specific instructions on how to make the fraud look like a family business gone wrong. Harrison's face went white. "Are you saying Catherine was specifically targeted?" "We believe so, yes. The fraud wasn't random. It was orchestrated to destroy Wells and Associates so the assets could be acquired cheaply." Agent Martinez pulled out a photograph and placed it on the desk. Marcus Webb, in what appeared to be a restaurant, sitting across from a younger man I recognized as my son. "Do you recognize this man, Ms. Wells?" I stared at the photograph, feeling pieces click into place with sickening clarity. "That's Marcus Webb. He's on Mr. Blackwell's board of directors." "Mr. Webb has been under surveillance for 6 months, Agent Foster said. "We believe he's been using this method to acquire multiple companies, create financial chaos, then swoop in to purchase assets at pennies on the dollar." Harrison stood abruptly and walked to the window. "That's why he's been trying to remove me. If Blackwell Enterprises fails, he can acquire it himself." "Exactly. But with Ms. Wells helping to turn the company around, his plan is failing, which is why we need your help." "What kind of help?" I asked. "We need you to attend tomorrow's board meeting," Agent Martinez said, wearing a wire. The emergency board meeting Webb had called for the next afternoon was standing room only. Webb arrived with his alliance of co-conspirators, clearly expecting to deliver the killing blow to Harrison's leadership. The wire I wore felt like a lead weight against my chest, but Agent Martinez's voice in my earpiece was steady and reassuring. "Ladies and gentlemen," Webb began, standing at the head of the conference table. "We're here to discuss the continued financial instability of this company and the need for new leadership." He launched into a prepared speech about Harrison's poor judgment, questionable consulting choices, and the need for immediate change. But I noticed his eyes kept darting to me, as if he recognized something familiar but couldn't quite place it. "The numbers don't support your concerns, Marcus," I said when he finished. "Blackwell Enterprises has shown consistent improvement over the past 2 months. Revenue is stabilizing, debt is being reduced, and profitable sectors are expanding." Webb's face darkened. "And who exactly are you to make such assessments?" "Wells Strategic Consulting appears to have materialized out of nowhere." "Catherine Wells, former senior partner at Wells & Associates Financial Consulting," I said, standing slowly. "You might remember my company. You helped destroy it 3 years ago." The room went dead silent. Webb's face went through several color changes before settling on a pale gray. "I have no idea what you're talking about," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Agent Martinez from the FBI might disagree," I said, nodding toward the door. As if summoned by my words, the conference room doors opened and federal agents entered. "Marcus Webb," Agent Martinez said, "you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit wire fraud, corporate espionage, and racketeering." In the chaos that followed, as Webb was led away in handcuffs and several board members scrambled to distance themselves from the scandal, Harrison and I stood together by the windows. The wire recording had captured everything. Webb's admission that he'd orchestrated multiple company failures, his plan to acquire Blackwell Enterprises, and enough evidence to connect him to the destruction of my original company. "So," Harrison said quietly, "what happens now?" "Now we rebuild," I said. "Your company, my reputation, everything they tried to destroy." "Together?" I looked at this man who had insulted me as a waitress and then trusted me to save everything he valued, who had stood by me when the FBI came calling and never questioned my integrity. "Together," I agreed. 6 months later, Blackwell Enterprises was thriving under new leadership, and Catherine Wells was once again a name associated with financial excellence rather than scandal. The insurance settlement from Webb's crimes had restored most of my original clients' losses, and Wells Strategic Consulting had a waiting list of corporations seeking turnaround expertise. Sometimes the best revenge is simply refusing to stay down when someone tries to destroy you. And sometimes the most unlikely partnerships become the strongest foundations for rebuilding everything you thought you'd lost forever. At 70 years old, I'd learned that it's never too late to fight back, and success tastes sweetest when it comes after someone has tried their best to break you. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe and feel free to share your story in the comments. Your voice matters.